Hello everybody. Seems like only last year I was here. More and more people. Nice to see you all. Fantastic. Yesterday was brilliant, and it's very disappointing 42% of you lot weren't there. Big mistake. It was fantastic. We have an hour, and I was given the question to share with everyone today. You've got 60 minutes, Romek, to tell everyone where we're going, our industry, shared services, outsourcing, ITO, what we do, what all of us do day to day, where are we going? And I had two choices. Either I talk for 60 minutes, or I bring four clever people up and they talk for 60 minutes. Now, I voted for me, but Andrew Hallam insisted that other people came, which I thought was grossly unfair. I thought I would have been okay, but apparently I'm boring. That's what he said. So what I did was I took the question. The question is, where are we going to be in 5 years? And the reason I think this is crucial for us is we need to be ready for it. Simple as that. If the industry is going to change, if we're going to be somewhere else in 5 years, we better start planning today for that change. We need to be thinking about what's going to be happening in the next year, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that we're ready a little bit ahead of the game. The only thing, two things I wanted to share with you is, I remember probably 20 years ago, when I first started in the industry, they told me, Romek, in 3 or 4 years, paperless office, paperless. There'll be no paper, paperless, he says. He has a piece of paper in his hand, a few of the guys, you can see paper all over the place. The reality is, the paperless office, we have less paper, but it is not paperless for sure. And that's 20 years ago, and it hasn't changed. I don't believe that change has come. You know, so this whole thing about what we see happening in the future and what we want to happen in the future doesn't necessarily come around. So I think there's always this story, you know, we all think these things are going to happen. We'd really like it to happen. We think it's realistic. But then 10 years, 20 years later, we're still wandering around with bits of paper in our pocket. So the challenge to the 4 people I gave was, what do you really think is going to happen in our industry in the next 5 years, and is it really going to change? So I'm going to just hand over straight away to the 4 people. By the way, these are super gurus. I'm not going to introduce them, they're going to introduce themselves. But these 4 people, we have more than 50, 60, I think nearly 60 years shared services outsource experience sitting, the 5 of us. These are super gurus, they know everything, more than me, really. So I'm going to just get Richard to come up and start and introduce himself and tell you everything.
Good morning, the name is Richard Jones. I've known that good man for 20 years, and pretty much the 20 years that I've been in outsourcing and shared service. And about 10 years into that story for me, I wanted to know where the industry was going to go next. And I went to India, came here to Poland, and of course, the next big stage in our industry was offshoring, moving work around the world. And I've been waiting for the next thing to come along. And 2 years ago, you wouldn't have heard anything about it. Robotics, robotic processing for outsourcing. And now it's in the newspapers, it's in the Times in London, it's in the Wall Street Journal, it's in all the analyst reports, you're going to see it a lot. So Romek asked me to come along and speak to you about robotics. He gave me 3 questions. What on earth is it? Is it real? Very Romek question. And what does it mean for Krakow? So that's what we're going to do, okay? Okay, so first of all, I've not got a million slides, you'd be delighted to know. So there is no strict definition of this robotics piece. Now, you've all got notepads and pens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trot through 10 very quick things that I think define this robotic space. And what I want you to do is write them on your notepad if they resonate with you and your business, okay? So the first thing this robotics thing is, we're talking about software principally here. And we've all had business process automation software around for a long time. Robotics is not about that. Robotics is a laser focus, which you have to get your head around, which is not doing anything with the architecture, your Oracle, your SAP, What it is, it's laser focused on replacement of the FTE sitting at the desk. Okay, so we're talking about software that replaces the human. So very, very interesting. So what does one of these little servers do? Well, it can do what a human could do. You can give it work, it can go and find work, it can read screens, it can make basic decisions if you've taught them to them. It can enter data into systems, into multiple systems. It can log on to your systems. It can go to the outside world to complete the business event that it's processing. It's laser focused on replacing the person. Second thing it does, it's about rules-based processing. Now, in my world, possibly in yours, I've worked with so many centres. There's two types of work that we do for me. We do judgment work and we do rules-based work. And whenever I go into a centre at first, if I came to visit you, you'd probably say, 80% of what we do is judgment and 20% is rules-based. And I tell you, every single time, when you look at it, it's the other way around. About 2/3, maybe up to 80% of what we all do can be defined by business rules. So these robot servers do rules-based processing. Third thing, it's not like automation as we've known it before. You get your Oracle or SAP-based architecture, you spend million. All of a sudden, somebody turns it on after 2 years, and it's like what I call the precipice effect. Turn it on, right, 200 people can go. Robotics doesn't seem to go like that. It grows virally. And very, very interestingly, because it goes in little groups, 10 at a time, 20 at a time, the clients that I'm going to talk to you about in Is It Real? I haven't seen any layoffs. Because it always goes, you're recruiting faster than that, you reduce the amount of recruitment you've got. Next thing is an FTE and a robot is not the same thing. A robot, on average, in all these early clients, one robot does the work of 2 FTEs because no vacations, no management meetings, they don't get sick very often. It's a different kind of game. They work 24/7, don't take holidays. Fifth thing, I think this is not a replacement. What we're talking about here is not a replacement for onshore people or offshore people. It's a third choice, if you like. We can hear from one of the other speakers at least. It's like a virtual person. We've become very used to thinking about onshore and offshore, and in the future I think we'll have a choice of onshore, offshore, and virtual people. Next thing that strikes me, I haven't seen I've worked with really quite a lot of corporate shared service on this so far. I haven't seen anybody saying robotics takes over a whole business process. But what I have seen is they get in and probably the minimum you can expect is about 1/3 of the FTE load can be robotized. And if you're really lucky, it can be more than that, but you can expect 1/3. The next thing about this is price point. Poland, Krakow, India, we exist on an arbitrage base case, subject to currency fluctuations, but it's more effective to process here. So one of these software robots costs about 10,000 euros a year to run. It does the work of 2 people. So that's a number to have in your mind. Right, the next thing, when you want to robotize a process in this world, it only takes 4 to 6 weeks to robotize a process. It takes then about maybe another month to kind of tune it, but once you've taught the robots how to do the work, from conception to going live, it's a month or 2. It's like nothing, frankly, I've ever seen before. So, my last little point that strikes me is quite a lot of these shared service centres that I've been looking at, they now have a robotics team in their processing division. It's not made up of consultants. It's not made up of technologists. They're always made up by the people who do the work today. They're typically the super users and the senior folks. And probably, if you've got 100 robots deployed, it looks like you have a team of about 10 people to run the robot farm. So there we go. That's to give you a feel for this robotics environment for shared service and outsourcing. Okay, is it real? Is this all just vaporware? I used to chair, don't anymore, a thing called the Operational Agility Forum, which was a place that large corporates came to talk about the problems that everybody has in this room, the challenges, what we can do. And it's become very dedicated to this subject. So I'm going to just tell you about what some of the real things that are happening today. Firstly, 2 banks. One big bank, which can't be named, they're very secretive and very global about what they're doing. They've just gone from 250 robot licenses to 500, so they're somewhere in between. I do know some of the things that they do with it. I'm not allowed to tell you, but I'm remarkably indiscreet after a few vodkas. Second bank that I can name, UK bank, domestic UK bank, Co-op Financial Services, so banking and insurance services. 250 roles have been replaced by 110 robots. They've got 11 people in the robotics team doing that work, and it's taken them 4 years to get there. No layoffs. Okay? Next one, a utility company, you'll all know, RWE Npower. The kind of things they're doing is revenue management for collections and billing, people moving house, changing their gas and electricity supply and so on, those kind of things. Around about 350 robots, and they've done it in parallel with a big SAP deployment. O2 Telefonica, so mobile phones, mobile phone carrier network, very large in Europe, very, very big in the UK. 600 people back office. Does that sound like any of you? I wonder. 600 people in the back office 2 years ago is now 450 people, 75 robots. Took 2 years to do it. Very, very interesting. Some of the business processes, like if you upgrade your handset with O2 Telefonica, used to take 24 hours, it takes 52 minutes now because the robots do it. So it's this transformational stuff and a business case that you can't ignore. One special thing there, all my Krakow friends, listen very carefully. They took a 50-person process running in Bangalore, back office process in Bangalore. That now runs in the north of England with 10 people and 10 robots, and it's cheaper. So really focusing on that little story. Big in the United States at the moment is the subject of reshoring, and right at the center of it. Now you'll notice that all those stories are shared service stories. What are the outsourcers doing? Now, it's very interesting to me that the early adopters are corporate shared service. However, the outsourcers are getting onto it. When you get back to the office, Google, you can write it on your notepads, Google Sutherland Robotics, and you'll see that Sutherland, who are very big in India-based offshoring, have just announced a robotics unit. There are 4 other big BPO businesses now starting to pilot. So there you go. Is it real? It's very early. I think there's about 50 corporates in the world trying this at the minute. It's very early. About a third of those, mysteriously to me, are in health services. But something is happening. Something is happening. And I've never felt more convinced that I can see what the next phase of our industry is going to be. So we'll move to the subject of should Krakow worry. You know, you're very, very successful. I'm very proud and happy to have been part of that. Opened up here in the Galileo Center about 2006, I think, with Romek's help. And, you know, it's a brilliant story. But we heard last night, for those who were at the conference, the amount of change in the world is increasing. So you've got to think about what happens next. All right, so the third part I want to tell you about is why I think it matters to you. And so I'm going to give you some questions as we go through, which I'd like you to take away and think about. Could we move to my first, see if I can do it, move to my first slide. Oh, here we go. Okay. So, a little bit of history for us. Back in the 90s, this is early 90s, left-hand circle, we started to see shared service deployments and outsourcing deployments, one client, one project at a time, early stuff. By the second part of the 1990s, the next 5 years, and there was an absolute magic moment for me in Accenture, Anderson Consulting as it then was. I had about 2,000 people doing accounting across Europe, and I figured out that 2/3 of my profit came from 1/3 of my clients. It won't surprise you. Those 1/3 of the clients were all in shared centers. Light bulb comes on. the way to do this is to build big utility factories to do this kind of processing. The next thing that happened, early 2000s, we all learned, I'm going to talk about this in a moment, but we all learned about offshore. We learned about nearshore, we learned about midshore, but it was all about getting the best value for our labor. And it all started to happen. It was very, very small until that point, but we have been in that third generation. You were part of that generation. We've been in it about 10 years. Do you think we're going to stay there? There's going to be another step coming. So, this slide, this little slide here, is the management slide that I used in 2002 to persuade my American corporate to go to India. The slide, basically, the business case was based upon three things. One was, it's in a way for this audience it's a side thing, but there was a tax change to enable us to move into India around about 1998. They took away the taxation walls, we could set up a free port, and we could move work. There were two things that really drove it, okay? The first was a new type of technology. That was the time that workflow technology was maturing in the market and terribly, terribly important for what you all do and what all your people do. It was the first time that we could move work to where you could get people instead of trying to find people where the work was. Absolutely central to Cracov's existence, actually. The second thing was the price difference. And the price difference that made it all explode was that not the person, but the desk that you'd set up in the offshore location with the person sitting at it and the telecoms and everything else, that desk would cost about 1/3 of what it cost then in the United States or in Western Europe. What happened? The market exploded, absolutely exploded. So it all came down to that slide. It's very good, except when it doesn't do it. Okay. You'll see the relation. This is what I call the Goldilocks slide. So if you know the children's story of the three bears, Daddy Bear, Mummy Bear, and Baby Bear. The Times newspaper did a piece for me about a year ago on this subject, and they said, give us a picture. So I gave them a choice of 54 pictures. This is the one they chose. Very, very similar. We've now got a new type of person, a virtual person. And you'll see, firstly, the numbers. You can get labour at a third of the cost, basically. You can service your work at a third of the cost if you go to that. There's another leap coming, and it's about a third again. So we can now, for this type of work, run it at 1/10 of the onshore cost. What is going to happen? The market is bound to react to that. Okay? Second thing, it's a new type of technology. It's a new type of technology, and the market seems to be calling it robotics. So, if that's going to happen, a little bit of homework for you, actually. If everything I say is true, the first question I give you is, for us in our industry, what do you think this means? Second thing is, what do you think it means for you and your people? Because I think it means something, and you'll be much more expert in that than I am. So, the last little thing I would give you is that I've taken this around a number of the Indian outsourcers, by the way, and it's much harder for some reason for the Indian community to get it. I think, employing people is a big value and so on, so there's a bit of a barrier there. There is an opportunity to go quicker. And the career advice, probably the career advice I gave Romek, by the way, would have been 20 years ago, but there's always a consistent piece of advice I give you in this industry that you're in is you have to be famous for something. So my final question for you to think about is, as you think about what you're going to be famous for, do you want it to be for last year's model or for next year's model? Romek, over to you.
Vivek, we're just going to go straight in.
Good morning, everyone. You mentioned paperless office, right? I think probably what they would have meant was newspaperless office, because we are getting towards the newspaper, isn't it? On the iPads and the tablets. So I think we're getting closer to it, but yes, paper does exist. I have a video to start with. I'm quite uncomfortable standing and talking, so. This is a very elite video which talks about a formal contract which we sign with most of our customers, in fact all of our customers. And the video depicts a relationship between a father and a son. It kind of personifies that relationship and tries to put this into legal terms. Trust me, I don't even remember 2 words out of the entire 1 minute, 10-second video which is being played. But primarily it talks about things like, on this date, the father and the son enter into a relationship, and henceforth they will be called father and the son with their names, definitely. And then it talks about that every year on the same date, the father will give a present to the son worth less than $50. Every night, the father is expected to tell a story to the son which should not be more than 10 minutes long. It also talks about that the story should not be repeated too often, etc., etc. So I think the crux which we could not hear, and we'll try to see if we can, play it back directly from the website towards the end of my presentation. In fact, it's not a presentation, it's just some thought awakening. We should try and see if the techies can enable that directly from the website instead of going and clicking the link here. So that's what we were all used to. That's what IT was. That's what primarily most relationships were 10 years ago or 20 years ago when, big fives or the HPs and the IBMs of the world, set in 10, 15, 20-year contracts with the who's who. Times have changed. Customers have become much smarter. There's a long way to go, in future. But at the same time, what is it that an Indian operating company or an Indian service provider is bringing on the table? I think one of the topics which Romek mentioned was, we captured, what next? Are we going to grow? Are we going to stay where we are? What are the challenges faced, by this industry? What are the challenges faced by Krakow? What are the challenges faced by the huge amount of graduates which we see passing each year? Are they complacent? Are they getting satisfied with what they are doing? Is language the only key differentiator for Krakow? Is run the business a status quo something which you're happy doing? Robotics will kill most of that. We know that. So let me just kind of, put things in the right perspective. If you look at what happened in the 18th century, typically we had the entire railroad industry, which kind of went about in a very siloed manner. And then across continent railways tracks were built. And that basically cut down the cost by nearly 80, 90, 100%. Not 100, of course, but a lot of cost saving for the end user was, provided. Then, towards the 1900s, we're looking at a gap of 100 years, so we're not looking at 3, 5, 10 years. The entire telecom went through a revolution. There was one company called AT&T. We look at what POTS was, the plain old telephonic system, how the GSM, later changed what AT&T ruled for close to 50, 60 years. And then another 100 years later, we see what is the IT revolution, in which we see, consolidating of a lot of on-demand services. We see more and more emerging trends, talking about utility-based computing, output-based pricing, gain share, pain share, all those kind of models which a lot of analysts talk about. So if I was to just translate the last 100 years and then, zoom in to where we are, in the last 10 or 15 years, what we see on the extreme left was what we called as Gen 1 or Generation 1 outsourcers. And the Generation 1 outsourcers, primarily their driver, was was cost or economies. They wanted to save cost. They wanted to look at economies. They wanted to see what is it that can reduce my cost. So they took jobs to people who were cheaper. Some call it labor arbitrage, and some call it, it is something which is anyways not core to my function, so let me outsource this to a cheaper location. Gen 1 typically was where most Indian IT companies boomed. Big time boom. It's cheaper, rupee is cheaper than a dollar, rupee is cheaper than a pound, rupee is cheaper than a euro. We see telecom links getting cheaper, the taxes are getting friendlier, so that was a good story. Everybody, all the 5, 6 big IT companies boomed, including HCL. But what next? Things, from a cost focus started moving from time and material, where you will fill timesheet, get payment, to more of a managed service, where the companies which were outsourcing would not even want to get into computation of how much I pay you every day or every hour or every month. They would say, this is my service, take it to a low-cost country, manage it for me. So while cost was a big consideration, they did not even want the overhead of doing what we called as, running the show in terms of T&M. So it became more like a managed service. Also, we look at, things like the revenue focus. Earlier, most of the revenue was primarily being focused and spent around run the business. So 90% of that was spent running the business, and only 10% was spent changing the business, because that's the way contracts were tied in. That's the way, long-term 10, 15-year contracts were there. That has changed. That has changed dramatically. Now, as we see, it became 65-35 in midterm, and now we're looking at 50-50. In fact, so much so that most of the companies we talk to now are actually coming back to us and saying, you know what, we really don't even have money for change anymore. So what we want to do is, we want to give you a small piece of money, but you transform. You bring value additions. And what you transform, basically you will fund the entire change. So think about it. They're looking at running the business, and the benefits they get monetarily, productivity-wise, while running the business, they want us to fund change. So where does this take this from us? Okay. So this is a slide. If you look at what it is showing you, all of this is typically our depiction of where my company comes from, and our footprint, which has been created only in the last 5 or 7 years. It's only in the last 5 or 7 years. So if you were to look forward and say, next 5 or 7 years, how is this picture going to change dramatically? This picture is going to get multiplied at least 4, if not 5 times. So if you look at our head count within Krakow, which is close to 600, we have plans to actually make it double in the next 18 months. And close to 5 years, we're definitely looking at increasing it 5 times. What is that going to bring? What's that going to mean for us? So, as I mentioned, from a language perspective, it's no longer going to be key. All the multilingual languages which we support from Krakow, trust me, I'm talking to 2 large customers which are no longer interested in doing multilingual. Some of you who are delivery managers in the room would already resonate to what I'm saying, where customers are feeling the pinch of cost, and they're coming back and saying, we are more than happy supporting English as a language. So my friends, my colleagues, if you believe that language is the only distinct advantage which you carry with you, it's no longer going to be something which you'll be able to sustain. So you need to think beyond. You need to think on how you can convert your skills into what can contribute to change the business. 25 people get replaced with 10 robots. That's reality. We heard that. That is going to happen. Automation. Small companies like IPsoft, nobody 2 years ago, all of a sudden they have propositions in terms of automation. We've got tools which do run book automation. We heard about it. Within our company, we're also trying to do human error reduction. What else is human error reduction if it's not robotics? Ultimately, it's a human error. Somebody comes and says, let's go for a walk for a couple of minutes, let's go for a cigarette. And you leave your screen open, something happens. That's an error. Robotics usually don't make errors. So that's here, that's reality, it's staring us at the face. The challenge which we need to ask ourselves is, are we prepared for it? And if we are prepared for it, we need to make amends, we need to make changes so that we can ride on the tide on the right side and surf through happily. Thank you.
Okay, so I think first to present myself, so I'm Paul van Beveren. I run, I would say, operations for Accenture operations in North and Central Europe. It's about, for us, North and Central Europe is about 13 countries. Okay, so, and I'm doing most of that for the past 10 years. Now, I didn't mention the word BPO, okay, because BPO is dead. So, and Accenture changed recently his strategy line. You know, we have, everybody has a kind of strategy line, and we removed the word outsourcing. We call it now operations. And I think that the messages that I will give you, I think, are a little bit consistent with what was already said previously. So we see a number of dramatic changes coming that will move the entire industry. And I would not only talk about the outsourcing industry, because that's only a sourcing question. I would even talk about the whole shared services industry to another level, or to a next generation, as we call it today. So a couple of things that are happening in delivery. First of all, we talked a lot about technology, and technology-enabled delivery is something that grows and grows and grows. I predict, even if the future is a black wall, but I predict that within 3 to 5 years, data input, meaning having people that just push data into a system, will disappear. And you have already heard about some of the achievements that robotics can do. I have seen it with my own eyes. And the first time I saw it, I couldn't believe it. But the second time I saw it, I couldn't ignore it. So that means that probably 40, 50, 60% of our workforce will need to be transformed. Because I don't believe that we would shrink in terms of number of people. I think that there is a lot of other things that we can do as service providers, but I think also as captive shared services. So robotics, technology will be on our agenda, and I think that myself, but each one of you, needs to become very curious about technology. Second is digital. Probably the reason why we are asked is that paper is the past. Even that each time I go to a meeting and each time I go to a conference, we still get paper and a pen. But personally, I don't have a PC. I have a tablet, and I have I would say a smartphone. And that's how I work. I do 100% of my job with these two things. Okay, so 100%, not 90 or 80, 100%. So digital is something that is already very present. Okay, we talk about cloud, we talk about mobility, we talk about collaborative tools. but it is only growing. So for me, another thing that is dead is desktop PCs. And I would even say laptops, okay? You already have, I would say, PC manufacturers that try to transform their laptops into tablets. So digital platforms, digital workforce is something that is coming to us. So then, it's true when I saw the title of this conference, is location important? Location is important because we need smart people, and we go where smart people are. That's why location is important. Not anymore, or less and less, because we pay a Polish accountant cheaper than a UK accountant. I will come to that point back a little bit later. And then the third point that I would say is quite disruptive in operations is data. Because you hear a lot about big data and how Google is using big data, and Facebook and all these, I would say, internet companies. But big data and data is a question to all of us. What do we do with the data that we use in our environment? And then I come to the word analytics, because I believe that we have value to add by working with the data that comes through our centers. And then I come to, I would say, a second theme that becomes very important. And I call it value beyond cost. And I start to call my managers beyonders. You know, there's a famous comic, Beyonders. Because we need to look beyond cost reduction. Okay? So it's not just anymore about reducing cost of a process. Now, the first thing we need to do if we talk about value beyond cost is that our people don't need just functional expertise. Okay? It's not just about being a good accountant or being a good HR professional or a recruiter or a supply chain manager. But we need to combine our functional expertise with developing deep industry knowledge. And for service providers, even for outsourcing providers, it will be important that they go in that direction or they will go out of the market. And what they have to do with that expertise and with the data that we use is to drive business outcome. Because there is much more business value in or dollars in business, driving business outcomes than just in cutting the cost of an FTE in 2 or in 3. And then it's about end-to-end approach. Is the next step. It's not about outsourcing invoice processing, or it's about outsourcing PO creation. But it's about looking at your end-to-end process and looking at source to pay, or looking at record to report, or looking at order to cash. And of course, if we look at end-to-end approach, in service providers, it's not anymore about us and them. It's about creating collaborative relationships with our clients. And then I come to the next point, because if it is about creating collaborative relationship with our clients, then I came up with a phrase yesterday evening: onshore is the new offshore. And to give you an idea, I manage a 5-digit number of people. 80% of them are not in Central Europe. So 80% of my people sit in Western Europe or Northern Europe. And only 20% of them sit in Central Europe. So it's not, in my environment, it's not about cost. Because if it was about cost, I would go in Europe as east as possible. And I don't do that. Because collaborative relationship with our clients is also sitting next to our clients, providing services together. Okay? And as well in F&A or supply chain services or HR services, in all the offerings that we have. And then a last point that I want to mention is the word innovation. Okay? And it's a word, if you look it up on Wikipedia, that has a very broad definition. But we need to come up with new things. It's not to talk about the achievements of the past. It's not about getting medals for what we did. But it's about knowing what we will do. Knowing how we will change the future and how we will bring that value, bring that outcome to the business, to your business if you work in a captive shared services. Your clients is the business, but for a service provider, our clients is not just, I would say, the functional lead in the client environment, but is the business of the client. That's one of the reasons why Accenture launched this year a development series for our leaders, together with MIT, focusing on how to develop an innovative mindset and how to use, and I think you will see some of it this afternoon, of one of our managers, is how to use, I would say, technologies or processes to develop innovative ideas and to be disruptive, not just posting transactions, because that, anyway, we told, will disappear. So that was, for me, or these are, for me, the key messages that I want to give to you, is the past is the past. Okay? So forget about your achievements. Okay? Don't take medals for what you did. But take a medal for what you will do. Okay? So that's probably my conclusion.
Good morning. Simon Seymour from PwC in London. I feel like after a very positive start with the video, there is a bit of reality possibly coming in and a bit of doom and gloom, but what I'll try and do is just give you a perspective of what I see from London. I lead in Europe what we call our efficiency practice. So picking up on the term of outsourcing instead, we don't call it shared service and outsourcing. And very much a theme from working with FTSE 25 is what the strategic response to the efficiency challenge is. And is that shared services or is it something else? So I just want to pick up on a couple of things. When Romek first said, can you give me predictions of the first 5 years? I kind of chuckled to myself because when I started consulting in the late 90s, there was a raft of predictions which never came true. And in that time, it was big ERP wave, it was big shared service wave, it was the start of the outsourcing wave. And all of those I would class as false endings. So the great predictions, and there was a great one from one of the big 4 audit firms of the late 90s that said the finance function would disappear by 2010. And the big four audit firms sat down in the early 2000s and said, we'll have real-time reporting, everything we do will be in regional shared service centres. We'll have fully automated lights-out processing on everything. All of those things are practically and logically true based on what we knew at the time, but the reality is the challenge of how do you get there and the pace you can shift. So there's no doubt all of these things will become true. The challenge is how does economics drive that and the reality and the pace that you can shift, and who's going to make the investments and when the fast movers are. And all of that nobody can predict. So we don't know where the next innovation is coming from. We know there's a lot of innovation out there. We know the Googles of the world are changing the landscape. That's driving huge technology change. It's absolutely true that cloud is probably the next big game changer because it's going to strip infrastructure away from most companies. There is absolutely no reason why anybody should invest in infrastructure going forward. But there are very few of those game changers, and actually how that lands, we don't know. But we can cast 100 years into the future, and we can probably be reasonably accurate that there will be no paper. But actually in the next 5 years, it's harder to be very precise. So false endings, and I think that takes me on to my third slide. I've kind of jumped one. I don't know if we can just move forward. I have the controller, that's my fault, there we go. I think these slides are available. I think one of the great things about being in PwC is we have a big role in Davos each year, and we interview the global CEOs and get a sense of what's going on in their minds. And there is no doubt this challenge between effectiveness and efficiency is forefront in their minds. And if you kind of class it about the strategic challenge of what should we do as a business and where should we go, and being the effectiveness challenge, and the efficiency challenge of how do we really make sure that we're driving in the right direction, and do that as simply as possibly and as efficiently as possible and at low cost. Actually, that challenge is increasingly shifting to the CXO, the board around them. So whether you're a finance director, whether you're a group HR director, whether you're a CIO, what's your response to that challenge? So it's on the board agenda for the CEO, but actually what are you doing to make sure that you're driving efficiency? And that's a business efficiency agenda, it's not a functional efficiency agenda. So what we've seen very consistently is people responding through things like shared services, pulling cost out, outsourcing, reducing the cost of finance, but the contribution of finance, for example, where is that in the course of your business? How is finance taking the business forward? And so that equation, that tension, is about doing more for less. And so we pick up on some of the things around how you're driving insight, how you're driving the business forward, how you're ensuring we're resilient in a global market which is increasingly complex. That's why the finance function hasn't disappeared, because the role is increasingly complex and challenging, and it needs smart people. Now, cost is an interplay into that, and there is no doubt that costs are only going one way, and that's because budgets for functions are only going to go one way. And there is increased spotlight on those budgets. So that's the tension, more for less. How do you, and certainly within a shared service environment, how do you enable the business and your functions and your functional leaders really to drive their agenda, which is about business efficiency, not just their own individual process efficiency? So tactical versus a strategic response. And that is very much playing out in the boardrooms of the FTSE 100 as we speak. I think if you look at the language around shared services, don't know which way I'm pointing. What is happening, there is no doubt that global business services as a tagline is on the board agenda. If you walk in and have any contact with the McKinseys or the big strategic consultants of the world, shared services is now pretty much a no-brainer in their books. And if you have a one-level org chart in any FTSE 100 boardroom today, shared services features. But it features right at the top. And it features as an efficiency play across all organisations. And so there is no doubt that GBS as a trend is something different to the way we've thought about shared services in the past. Now, is it a name? Is it just ditching the old shared services and outsourcing terminology? No, I think it's more than that. And the challenge is actually how do you align your functions across functions to deliver real value in the business? So if GBS is the vehicle for that, then we expect GBS to feature much more significantly and consistently across functions. So where you've had certainly one function playing in shared services and the others not, we expect that to rise. So definitely, even though automation will come through, there is an expectation that there is continued growth. More stuff will continue to be outsourced. More stuff will continue to move into shared delivery centres. New locations will appear which will continue to drive arbitrage. There will continue to be a continuation of the responses we've seen, but the context in which that is happening is changing. And then actually that creates opportunity as well. It is a threat about how you think about moving forward. I think from an outsourcing perspective, we continue to see hybrid models dominate. So very much use your third-party partners to support you, but use them in the right places, and selectively think about your response. So where we see in sort of a lot of our surveys around shared services entities and boards suggest that where you've got somebody controlling the agenda internally, actually you get a better response than outsourcing everything. So we expect this hybrid model to continue to play pretty significantly over the next 5 years. So I'll finish on a few challenges. I think the challenge is in value. I'm picking up on Paul's point, actually. How do you justify your value over and above cost? And this is this tension, this balance between cost and value. Now, should you create relentless focus on driving out efficiencies? Should you force robotics? Should you reduce the cost? But actually, elimination of tasks only takes you so far. So again, what is really going to drive your business forward, and how do you make a contribution to that? There is no doubt when we look at our benchmarking surveys and the data in there, the primary driver of cost is business complexity. It's the number of locations you're operating in, it's the type of industry you're in, it's the complexity of the underlying processes. So even though you can simplify and move to a low-cost location, if business complexity remains high, you're going to have high cost. So the challenge is actually how do you drive simplicity into your business and think more simply about your business? So that's partly process, but actually that's in many ways rethinking your business. So one of the techniques which has been around for a long time around lean, actually we're seeing a reinvigoration of lean very much, but this time it's coming around people. How do you get the best out of your people rather than the best out of your process? How do I use the capacity appropriately? Can I focus people on the right things? Can I create priorities? And that's the way of driving efficiency, and focus on your business priorities rather than just automating something or focusing on a process which arguably doesn't need to exist, or you could stop doing. My last 2 points, I think we've picked up on cloud transformation. There is no doubt technology is changing and changing fast. We can't predict where it's going to go, but we can see the themes. And actually my challenge to the boardroom is how are you going to manage this shift? What are the new governance models? How are you going to work? How are you going to move multifunction? How are you really going to get the best of end-to-end value chains? How are you really going to manage global organizations that are in the tens of thousands of people? That's all driving quite significant debate. And there is no doubt, if you take accounting as an industry, my challenge to the accounting industry is we're probably not training people to be operating in that kind of world. So the demands on finance are shifting, the demands on HR are shifting. So there's a massive learning, development and capability challenge in this. Where are the leaders with these new capabilities coming from? And so actually we're seeing quite a lot of new investment coming back in, and quite a lot of discussion around cognitive capabilities and cognitive testing in individuals to make sure you get smart people, because you can train them technical things. So it's getting access to the smart people. I think I'll leave it there. Romek, back to you.
We were going to have question time, but we've run out of time. So I'm going to try and summarise all of what you just said. And I've written nothing down on my bit of paper, nothing. Or I've got something written down, but nothing to do with what you guys said. Paperless, it's all in here, God forbid. I tell you what I've just heard, and I agree with it. I've never thought about it that way, but it is. If you ask me, will our businesses grow in the next 5 years? I am 100% certain they are going to grow. I have no doubt at all that the 35,000 will be 70,000 in the next 5 years. I have no doubt about that at all. Clear. What I think is going to completely change is the work and the type of work that we're going to be doing in 5 years' time. So I think where we are, a lot of us are running centres where we've got guys sitting doing this, and very much a data processing type of workshop. I think that is going to die. Robotics are going to come in. We're going to change, we're going to put GBS in and run processes far more sensibly and less interconnections. And less interconnections means less of this. So we're going to have people not sitting there doing typing and not thinking. I think we're going to have 70,000 people sitting there actually adding value to the business. That is where I think we're going to be going in 5 years' time. And so the challenge to us in the room, number one is we need twice as much office space, so all your real estate guys keep building. We need 35,000 new people, so universities keep pumping them out. And centre managers, I think you've got to start thinking now for the future about how you incorporate your business back into the business. I think you've got to stop thinking about, I'm offshore and miles away from the business. I think you've got to start putting yourselves back into it and focusing on the talent pool we have of running and assisting the business to grow everywhere around the world and having Kraków as the hub of brilliance. That's where I think we need to go, guys.